Good evening, everybody. Can I have a motion to come out into public from executive session?
Motion.
Thank you. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Wallace?
Yes.
Mr. Dorr?
Yes.
Dr. Kukunis?
Yes.
Ms. Sahowski?
Yes.
Mr. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Healy?
Yes.
And myself is a yes. Can we please rise for the pledge? Well, after the pledge, if we could have a moment of silence. Kevin Flores, class of 2018, passed away yesterday, and we would like to keep him and his family in our thoughts and prayers. So after the pledge, if we could just have a moment of silence, please. Do we have a flag, Mr. Hines? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States
of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the superintendent's report. Ms. Toner?
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Downs. Good evening, everyone. The 2020-2021 school year begins tomorrow with our 10-month employees returning and our first cohort of students returning on Thursday. I would like to thank all of our 12-month employees for all of their work readying the buildings and preparing schedules for our students during this incredibly busy summer. As you can imagine, the work that needed to be done to prepare for this year's opening involved different preparations than a typical year. As always, our number one priority is the safety of our students and staff. For those who have requested computer devices for their children, robocalls have been sent and a schedule has been determined at each school. All of these preparations are being done with the utmost of care. I thank everyone in advance for your patience and understanding as we begin this new school year. On tonight's agenda, Latin teacher Lorene Custer has tendered her resignation for retirement purposes, and I wish her a happy and healthy retirement. Also on the agenda is the rescindment of our newly hired Latin teacher's appointment. Please know that our personnel department is still recruiting candidates for our Latin program. Unfortunately, students will begin the school year without a Latin teacher, but we are hopeful that we will have qualified candidates in place very soon. I wish all of our students and staff the best as we embark on this new and different school year. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go on. Ms. Toner, are we going to go on to Ms. Sanders?
Yeah, I think at this point you wanted Mr. Venator to speak a bit about reserves, and then Ms. Sanders is here to answer any questions that the board may have before we go to consent agenda and further discussions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Venator, please.
Yeah, I know Mr. Schneider had asked that I speak about contingency budgets and what that means for the district. And a contingency budget is subject to spending limitations. Those expenses are limited to the amount necessary to pay for teacher salaries and ordinary contingent expenses. Ordinary contingent expenses are those expenditures which the Board of Education considers essential to provide the minimum services legally required to operate and maintain the schools and educational programs of the district, so as to provide an uninterrupted education to the students and preserve the property of the school district. The Commissioner of Education has, in prior decisions, identified what are ordinary contingent expenses and what are authorized, therefore, in a contingency budget. Those things include, and I'll just give you a partial list of the things that are ordinary contingent expenses as determined by the Commissioner of Education. Things like debt service, judgments from courts, Social Security, retirement obligations, payroll taxes, pre-existing contractual obligations, which would include obligations imposed by collective bargaining agreements under the New York State Taylor Law. There are some expenditures that are expressly authorized to be ordinary contingent expenses by statute: teacher salaries, sports, transportation, textbooks, health and welfare services, pre-kindergarten programs, contracts with BOCES, expenses for your cafeteria operation. All of these things are determined to be ordinary contingent expenses, and that by no means is an all exclusive list. There are a number of other things, but those are the main things that are covered by that are considered to be ordinary contingent expenses. There are things that have been specifically determined to not be considered ordinary contingent expenses under the law. They're somewhat limited. For instance, things that are not ordinary contingent expenses are salary increases for non-instructional, non-unionized employees. New equipment is a non-ordinary contingent expense. Public use of school buildings and grounds, except where there is no cost to the district, and the district is permitted to charge a fee that meets or exceeds its actual costs under an ordinary contingent budget. Not essential maintenance is not an ordinary contingent expense. Capital expenditures, except in an emergency. And also the last major item of non-ordinary contingent expense are consultant services to review district operations and make recommendations necessary for the creation of the budget. So that's just a general overview of what are ordinary contingent expenses and what are not ordinary contingent expenses.
Would have any questions? Ms. Sanders?
Yes.
Do you have something that you want to read off, or are you just waiting for questions?
I was told to be available to answer questions that the Board of Education may have.
Okay, thank you. Does the board have any questions for Ms. Sanders or Mr. Venator?
Mr. Venator, you did mention that sports was a permissible expenditure under the contingency, sports, music, and the arts?
Correct. Yes.
And we were under the assumption that it wasn't.
Oh, it's an ordinary contingent expense to the extent that you are authorized, the Board of Education is authorized in a contingency budget to have a sports program, to have extracurricular activities, to have transportation. It's not one of those items that are expressly precluded. It doesn't mean you have to fund them. It means that it is a permissible expense even in a contingency budget.
Thank you.
If it was not an ordinary contingent expense, then it wouldn't even be an option for the Board of Education to even consider.
Anybody else with any questions for Mr. Venator or Ms. Sanders?
I don't have a question for you, then I have comments.
I have a question for Ms. Sanders. If we start spending our reserve funds and we're expecting at least a 20% decrease in state aid, how will that affect how we can stay afloat for next year's budget?
So there are two different things. The first thing would be, as we know, since the reserves is set up under general municipal law, there are restrictions as to how you can spend that money for and for what purpose. And to the extent that you could budget for, or you have an unanticipated expenditure that you need to provide funding for with one of those reserves, that's absolutely permissible. To the extent that there is not a particular expenditure authorized under the general municipal law for that reserve, then it cannot be expended. Overall, if the question is, if we utilize our reserves to support our budget. Obviously, if our budget is tight and we don't have the funding available to support those reserves going forward, that's approximately $900,000, $1 million that this Board of Education has used to support the spending side of their budget over the last year, and then about $800,000 previously. So you would have to look at, if you exhausted the reserves, where might you get funding to the extent of approximately $900,000 to support the subsequent year's budgets. Because as we know, once you take the reserve and you spend it, that has to be replenished in some fashion to be able to support a budget. And the way to establish the funding of that would be to not spend the budget in its entirety, or to recognize revenue over and above what has been budgeted. The other side of it is, if you're looking at possibly 20% of state aid being withheld, and we don't know at this point if that's a temporary withholding or it's going to be a permanent cut. On your budget, 20% is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $6.5 million, okay, based upon this year's budget figure that I'm looking at, this year being 2020 to 2021. So on the other side, then, you're looking at, if this is a permanent cut, having to look towards unassigned fund balance to the extent that it's available if you want to maintain programs intact as supported by the budget, to be able to cover that potential $6 million plus cut. Is that the question, Dr. Kukunas?
Yes, and we can't replenish that. The only way that I see to roll over our programs is to go over the tax levy, and we need a supermajority for next year. Is that correct?
It's too early because the audit's not complete, so I don't know what the final numbers are for 2020. I don't know if I could even address that as a response, okay? I think it might be best. I think I'm scheduled to present the audit report to the Board of Education or the audit committee, sometime towards the latter part of September. Once I think we have hard numbers in front of us, then it might be more beneficial for the Board of Education to be able to make some decisions based upon what those numbers are. We're just not far along in the audit process right now, unfortunately, to be able to tell you what those numbers look like.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Mr. Hoskin.
Ms. Sanders, if you could just explain, if we do use the money in reserves, or if we agree to use it to fund certain programs, and in the event that either it's canceled by New York State or things are postponed per season, what happens with the money if we don't use it? Doesn't it just stay there, or how does that work?
Okay, so that's a good question. Each reserve, as I mentioned at the beginning, has a specific purpose under general municipal law. So it's not as if the reserve balances are available to support general spending within the budget. For example, the district has adopted by authorization of the board, the reserve for employee benefit accrued liabilities. Fortunately, you've done this as a Board of Education in the past, because this is the funding that takes care of compensated absences when people retire from the district. And so, but to give you an example, during the year, because you had funding available in that reserve, as people retired and separated from the district, the amount was quantified by administration, and there were resolutions passed by the Board of Education, which is the appropriate thing to do, to remove money from that reserve and use it as an appropriated reserve to support the spending of the budget. So that reserve can only be used for that particular purpose. And there's about $2 million worth of expenditures for compensated absences that are going to be funded by board resolutions that took place during school year 2020. The two retirement reserves could only be used for that particular purpose: employees' retirement contributions or teachers' retirement contributions. Unemployment, the same thing, and workers' compensation, the same thing. So it's not for which general municipal law allows you to spend.
Could you speak specifically then to one of the major issues at hand, using reserves for varsity sports or sports in general, music and clubs? Could you reference any reserve that would be appropriate for that? And in the event we agree to use the reserves for those, we don't end up having sports or we're not using all the monies, what would happen in that event?
Okay, so that's a good question. So there's unassigned fund balance. So there's many different components of fund balance. And the portion of your fund balance that is not earmarked at this juncture, this is the number as of June 30th, 2020, was $5.7 million. So as we know, you're allowed to retain 4% of unassigned fund balance. It's 4% of the subsequent year's budget under real property tax law in order to be in compliance. And so if you were looking to fund something, develop an additional contingency budget on top of what you already have in place, per the attorney's, discussion as to what items you might consider, I would think as your auditor, you would be looking to the unassigned fund balance. And then it's the same situation as we know. Once we use that money, we appropriate unassigned fund balance to take care of this year's items that we're using to add to our contingent expenditure budget. If we do not generate a surplus in 2021, that means we don't have that unassigned fund balance anymore. And so to the extent, and I'll just give you the worst scenario let's just say that state aid cuts are 20%, okay? And we find out that they're permanent, okay? That's going to be made up. If you're going to spend every budget dollar, that has to be made up through unassigned fund balance. You have $5.7 million. We don't think that's going to happen at this juncture, but we don't know, okay? The additional amount of spending that you as a Board of Education might authorize is also coming out for contingent budget purposes, is also coming out of that unassigned. And then as a reminder, in order to go ahead and create the budget, the Board of Education has been using a combination of unassigned fund balance and reserves of $3.5 million, okay? That's what you've used in 2019. You used almost $3.5 million in 2018. So you would need to be able to recreate that as an additional funding source on top of everything else that we just described.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
What would happen if we decide to put more than 4% in the unassigned fund balance? If we went above that, is there a financial penalty if we do it, or what would happen?
So you're not in compliance with real property tax law. Would there be a specific purpose for which the money would be used?
Well, I think it's quite obvious in this tax year that there could be many unanticipated expenditures,
okay,
including losing state aid.
Okay. So, and that's a question, you would not be in compliance. It would be in your management letter. If there was a planned use of the amount over the 4%, we would indicate in the management letter as to why the board's decision was to keep more than 4% of unassigned fund balance. I think you would want to quantify exactly what it is. And then, from a legal standpoint, your attorney's on the meeting, so I would really defer to him on that, because that's something that he could probably address better.
So in those instances where districts have exceeded the 4% limitation, if there were to be an appeal to the Commissioner of Education brought by a member of the community, and the Commissioner were to find that you violated the real property tax law by exceeding the 4% limitation, typically the Commissioner of Education, if it's a first time offense, will essentially issue a warning and a cease and desist. That's typically what has been the remedy that the Commissioner of Education has handed out in those first instances where a school district has not been in compliance with the real property tax law.
So in this unprecedented times of uncertainty and not knowing what aid might be cut, it really wouldn't be harmful for us to put more than 4% in there, because we would be able to justify where that additional money would go.
Well, in terms of a potential penalty from SCD, no, it wouldn't be harmful in that regard. The only thing that you would have to consider, as Ms. Sanders was talking about, would be the long-term financial, ramifications of doing that. That's a different story. But in terms of a penalty imposed by SCD, no, I don't see that there would be a penalty imposed.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, not hearing any more questions. We're going to move on. Thank you, Ms. Sanders. Thank you very much. I don't know if the board wants her to hang out for a while. While we go over the old business, maybe more questions will arise during that. Consensus of the board, please.
I think we're fine. Thank you, Ms. Sanders.
You're welcome.
Have a good night. Thanks again.
Okay, you're welcome. Have a good evening.
Good evening. Okay, we're gonna consent agenda. Could I have a motion to approve all the items on consent agenda as presented? Can I have a motion, please?
Motion.
Can I
Second.
have- Thank
Sorry.
you. Mr. Wallace,
Yes.
Mr. Dorr,
Yes.
Dr. Kukunis,
Yes.
Ms. Zahowski,
Yes.
Mr. Conley, Healy,
Yes.
and myself is a yes. Resolution passes. We're going to old business. Old business here is that we're going to have a discussion on the reserves. We're going to continue the conversation that we had last meeting. Mr. Dorr, you said you had some comments to make earlier?
Yeah, I believe it's in our best interest and the best interest of our students and our parents in the community to dip into the reserves to fund at least varsity level sports and music and the arts and clubs in the high school. We are charged with educating the whole child, and that includes what they can do at a bluegrass play or in chamber orchestra or on a sports field. I think it would be prudent at this time to go above the 4% unappropriated fund balance and use additional funds for at least high school sports and clubs and music.
Anybody else?
Well, Mr. Dorr, you say we're charged with educating the whole child. So varsity are the only ones that really count, because what about JV in the middle schools? Athletes.
It's my understanding that we could bring everybody from 9th to 12th grade to play varsity sports.
What about 7 and 8, where they're learning the game?
They would.
And they're learning the instrument and everything else.
I have to be at some point also fiscally responsible and find out what we have for money.
Okay, so Mr. Sanders' recommendation was to wait until after the audit committee meeting, which is, I believe, September 16th, and I think we could probably make a better decision at that point.
Well, according to the governor, teams can start practicing and playing games as of September 21st.
Right, so our meeting is the 16th. So we can have a meeting that night or the very next day.
The 16th, I don't believe is this auditor. I believe it's the other auditor. Mr. Snyder, can you?
No, excuse me, it's both. The audit committee will meet with Ms. Sanders on the 16th, and she'll have her audit report then.
Anybody else?
Yes.
Go ahead,
Well, Mr. Dorr, I want to just thank you for being very persistent with this And I have a question. So, Mr. Wallace, you bring up a great point about everyone being included. Is there a way that we could follow what Mr. Dorr is recommending, and then on the 16th, after the audit report, reevaluate and then include the JV and the middle school? Is there a way that we could agree to something tonight,
Can I make a
put it in
suggestion?
place, and then after the audit on the 16th, add whatever we were leaving off for tonight, just for safety? And if we have extra, then we can add the JV and the middle school. Is something like that possible?
May I speak?
Ms. Haley, could you let her get her question answered, please?
Thank you. I would like to again look at line item budget.
Sorry.
No, Ms. Haley, I asked to wait
Oh,
so
I'm sorry.
Mr. Houseke's question could be answered.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I didn't hear that part.
I'm not sure who would answer that. Sam or Chris Venator? I don't know who would have the answer to that.
Ida?
I would defer to Sam on that question.
You can certainly elect to expend money out of the unassigned fund balance tonight and then revisit that discussion at a future board meeting to elect to expend additional money out of the unassigned fund balance. That's certainly within your right to do so as a board. At some point you decide how much is responsible for use, but you can certainly elect tonight to appropriate additional money out of the unassigned fund balance. I think the board, should consider balancing how much money is going to end up going into the dedicated reserves versus how much money you want to fund into the unappropriated fund balance and then remove for purposes of increasing this year's budget. At some point, we're going to have to address the fall off in state aid, and the long-term plan that I believe the board has endorsed, or I believe they've endorsed, is to use those specific line item reserves to make up the shortfall in state aid when that comes to pass. So I certainly understand Mr. Dorr's inclination to overfund the unassigned fund balance, but you also need to make sure that you are putting adequate money into the specific reserves so that we can make up for the loss in state aid without having to cut program. But to answer your question, Ms. Husky, you can certainly appropriate money out of the unassigned fund balance whenever you like, and then do it again whenever you like.
Thank you, Sam. Ms. Haley, go ahead.
Okay, so as we had talked that we were going to, with our first plan, to go back in September, and by that time we were going to know some more numbers as well as the audit. So if we look at the charter school line again, and I believe the latest number is 444 children, and we know the current tuition is 17,771. Can we look there for money to at least fund fall? And as well as, I believe Miss Tona had a club and music and sports that she put together in one of our packets where it was a little reduced, that 192,072 number, Christine?
What are you looking at?
Well, I'm just looking at how we can fund with the money that's not going to go to, that we had earmarked for charter school. There's funds there, there's money, and use that to help with these clubs, the music. But there were two numbers you gave us. One was the original number of 296,299, and then
Right, that's the number for all clubs
Right.
and music, elementary through high school. And when we say music, that doesn't include daily lessons, it's musical performances. So just to be clear, daily music lessons are not being cut from the budget, even if we're on contingency budget.
Okay, so then
So what I did, if
you had a reduced.
the question that I was playing with numbers while you were talking, when you're looking at just high school clubs and musical performances plus varsity athletics comes to $618,539. Everything comes.
I was looking at.
Everything comes to $1,260,277. So that would be the cost
Okay.
of all of the athletics and all of the clubs and musical activities paid for.
Okay, you gave us a breakdown.
I can show the breakdown
of high school clubs. There was one where it came the reduced total for clubs and performances. You pulled out elementary clubs.
Mr. Hines, can you let me share the screen, please?
Virginia, I think when we were talking about the contingency budget, I think that was in one of the options.
Yes, it totaled
Right.
192,000.
Option 2, I think it was.
Yes.
All right, so this slide shows clubs and musical performing groups broken down by high school, middle school, elementary for clubs, and again for music.
You had one that was a reduced one. You had reduced total for clubs and performances. It was an.
Oh, I'd have to pull that. That was from a previous presentation. I didn't know that you wanted that information tonight. I'd have to pull that up.
That's okay. You would look to make reductions that would best serve the needs of the students. And especially with remote learning and in our situation. So I know it removed elementary clubs, and I think we were going to look to condense some of the.
We were looking at high school and middle school and deciding on a certain amount of money and then allocating as many clubs with that amount of money based on interests and what makes sense during this time with COVID challenges. So that's an option for the board as well. To look at the clubs that are here by high school, middle school, elementary, decide not to run elementary clubs, that's an option, and then limit the number of high school and middle school clubs. And we already have in the budget the senior class advisors, junior class advisors, student council, National Honor Society, and something else. Student Council, National Honor Society. Sam, was there one other club?
Yearbook.
Yearbook, thank you. So those will still happen. They weren't taken out of the budget. They're in the contingent budget. And then these are the athletic cost breakdown.
Right, and so with our charter numbers and that line, I know we already said we had the 250,000, so we could be looking at possibly another 650,000, and then we have money 57,708 from our last plan that Dr. Kokonis had put together. That with that, maybe that could help us get all of fall sports, all our children, middle school, JV, and varsity. A third, maybe the children don't need new uniforms. Can we save money not doing uniforms? And if we were to add in, a third of that row where I guess it was like 50,000 there, it would still have some money left over.
And just a word of caution as we are staffing classrooms, because we have the need for additional classrooms based on the remote option and some special ed needs that are both now in person and remote. We are looking on the September 8th agenda. There'll be a couple more hires that we're looking at that we need to put in place in order to fully staff all the classrooms going both hybrid and remote. So those will be tapping into the budget as well.
Well, I was just trying to give something where we weren't at this point going into the unappropriated fund balance, just looking at the line item. And I know for me, if this is something people are looking to do, I think it's important to include the 5 o'clock starts. Because if we're talking about equity, we want to make sure that children can get home. How they're going to get there on their 4 days off, I'm hoping the community will all pull together to make sure that all our children can participate in the clubs and the music as well as athletics. But that's something that I would be more comfortable with than looking to go into reserves.
Do we know how many additional staff we're going to need for the remote and for the classrooms? Do we have an idea? Is it teacher staff or is it TAs?
It looks like, well, we're working on that. I can't give specifics right now, but it's going to be a combination of both TAs and teachers. We're looking to reshuffle the people that we have that have teaching certifications to meet the needs that we have.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Again, I'm just saying how important this is. We're losing students by handfuls and handfuls of students that are leaving. These are good kids that are leaving the district that will never come back. We're going to start losing staff. I think we've already seen that. But we're going to start losing coaches that are going to other districts, and we're never going to get them back. If we want to have a future for Riverhead, we should really consider funding sports, music, and the arts.
Mrs. Healy, I found that information if you want me to put it up on the screen with the reduced options.
There you go.
That has just suggested reduced options where we eliminate elementary clubs, we reduce high school, we reduce middle school. And the high school and middle school music stay the same, and elementary music stays the same.
Is that what you were asking for, Ms. Healy?
Yes, I remember seeing that.
Yeah, it was in the August 7th update.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tono. Anybody else?
If I may,
Sure.
I honestly, I want to keep the Washington sports, at least for the fall. I think it's important, whether they happen or not. I think that maybe a compromise would be put all the clubs and music in, so we're giving something for everyone. I'm looking, even if that slide that we just showed, taking off roughly 107,000 off of that, we're at 580,000, my numbers, fund all full sports for JV middle school and select clubs. And I'd like to skip elementary, but then you're looking at another, I guess it's 42. So you're looking at another little over 600,000 fund and the fund club. If it can be done, we can come to that compromise. We'll find ways to do it. Like you said, if we're not in uniforms or work, I mean, obviously football is not practicing. So what's the cost savings on that? I think it can be done. And if that's 600 and just under 700 is something that we can't go forward and do.
And I understand the difficult scenario that we're all in right now. And I wish that the students could have everything that they deserve. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't caution you overspending the budget or not having any excess out of this budget. It's not going to help us next year. It's going to be difficult to have a budget for the 21-22 school year that meets the needs. beyond athletics and clubs, it is a very dangerous place by looking to spend some of the areas like charter school, which is an unknown area. We just, in the past week, I think we're up about 4 since I updated last week, just in charter school. I just have to caution the fact that we could end up in a predicament for the 21-22 school year where we don't have the excess budget, which will refund the appropriated fund balance. It's just, and we were looking at the number of staff right now, and this is not definite. We're looking at 2 to 3 teachers and approximately 5 TAs that we need to fully fund, fully staff the classrooms between hybrid and remote.
I also want to put it in the dangerous situation we may be in if we don't fund music clubs and sports. How many students will then drop out of school because sports or music or clubs were the only reason they came to school? How many of them are going to be involved in illegal activity or may end up with a higher number of teen pregnancies? These are definitely things we should consider if we don't fund sports, that are real possibilities that are going to happen.
I understand what you're saying, Mr. Dorr. I completely get it. It's an impossible situation that we're in.
I'm worried because normal contingency, it'll take 3 to 4 years to get finally back on your feet. And if we start taking here and taking there, it's going to take us that much longer to come out of this.
So what do we do now? Because we obviously know how everyone feels. We know what the risks are. We know what the rewards are. But what do we do now? Do we put this up for a vote? Mr. Venator, do we put something up for a vote?
I think you'd have to identify what exactly is that you want to get consensus on before we go through the voting process. So a number of different scenarios were proposed. I think we need to narrow that discussion down. What specifically are you looking to have the board adopt a resolution for? What amount and for what activities, so that we could you could consider a resolution to expend money out of unassigned fund balance, but you need to know specifically what amount and for what type of activities you want that to be considered for.
Okay.
I don't know if you have a consensus yet on that.
Right. So I know this is going to take some time, and I hope that the board and the community can be patient tonight while we process this, because there's been a lot of conversation. There's been a lot of numbers thrown around in the last 50 minutes since, we've been, or whatever, 20 minutes that we've been talking about this. Is there a way that someone could highlight everything that we just said? So let's start with, let's keep everything. What is the cost? Then let's take out something. What is that cost? Can we spend some time just to clarify again? Because this is a very important decision that we're making tonight. And I just want to be, for myself, be very clear on what I'm agreeing to and how my decision will affect the district and the students. So can someone facilitate that?
And I also would like to clarify, Ms. Tona, so you were looking to the charter school money to help fund, you said you had teachers. I mean, is that something that you were looking?
We're looking for any place in the budget that will allow us to have the money to staff the extra teachers that are needed in order to allow us to run virtual and hybrid. The number of students that are opting for full virtual has increased each day.
Why do we have to offer full virtual? I know there's other school districts on the island that if they don't agree to the plan the district put up, then they have to homeschool.
That was something we had that conversation, and that was what was in the plan. We were trying to be as flexible as we could. Everyone has a different situation. Again, no win situation here. I could start a spreadsheet and put it up on screen. Someone very wise told me that I shouldn't do math in public in case I make a mistake. I don't want you to hold me to any mistake that I could make.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that, obviously all the board members need to be patient with that. And as the community, as we're trying to process and eliminate and support, as best we can, we're just breaking it down right now. We're throwing stuff out there. We're trying to figure out what works, what we can afford. And so if everyone, Christine, of course, your math skills I will never judge because I don't know that I could do. No, but I mean, fast on screen. I think everybody agrees that we're listening with sort of bated breath and understand that there's room for error, and if there is, we're going to identify it immediately. So,
well, we do have one thing we talked about. Well, it was talked about, and I think after it was spoken about, it was kind of dropped, and that was taking from the fund balance, raising the fund balance or something, Chris, right, Mr. Dorr?
Yes.
But that's been dropped from the whole scenario now, correct?
I still think that's a viable option, that we put the more than 4% in the unappropriated fund balance. I think it's a very reasonable decision that we make when we're in a situation like this.
Okay, Mr. Schneider, could you write that down so we have a list of things that, thank you. And what was the other was take from the budget itself, correct, Ms. Healing? Find the
yes.
money in the budget?
I think Ms. Tonis should include the costs that she thinks that she's going to incur, like her needs. She's saying she needs 2 teachers and
well, she's thinking it could be 2, it could be more teachers.
Yeah, we're working on this live. I can't commit to a number on that right now.
Well then, right. So just that, when we were planning for the coming year, so I know there has to be some flexibility, but still in that line item, there's at least 700,000. That's even if you were to get 2 or 3 more charter school students.
And we also, discussion was also to fund everything and then fund certain things. So we got to decide what side you want, what you exactly want on the list.
Well, I want everything on the list. So, what does that look like? Let's pull the Band-Aid off.
Well, we already, that was over.
Yeah, it was over $1.2 million. Mr. Schneider, do you have all of this in a spreadsheet already or close to it?
I have it in a spreadsheet that makes sense to me. I can show it. I don't know if it's the format the board is going to like it, but I can show it, sure.
As long as you explain it, Mr. Schneider.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Thank you.
Ms. Downs?
Yes.
I think the auditor recommended that we probably wait until after the audit's done too, so we can see exactly what money we have.
Yes, I agree with you, Mr. Wallace, but apparently the rest of the board wants to move along.
They can't, hold on, they can't start practicing to the 21st anyway.
That's not true.
That's what you said. You said that the governor said they could start practicing on the 21st.
No, they can start practicing now. They can start playing games as of the 21st for everything but volleyball and football. And volleyball and football can start practicing. They just can't play any games yet.
All right. Well, I mean, that was our recommendation. So I think that's my feeling, that we wait for that. But let's see what everybody says.
I agree, Mr. Wallace, but there's other people on the board, so let them.
Yes, there is.
Now.
Ms. Downs, if I may,
Sure.
any decisions that we make right now are short-sighted in the sense that we have too many unknowns moving forward in the next few months. And I did recommend, and everybody agreed a few weeks ago, that reassess where we are in January. And I still hold true to that with what the governor is or isn't promising, and with the advice of the auditor as well. If we do start digging into our reserved unassigned fund, those are short-term gains with very dire long-term consequences. And I do not feel comfortable, digging into that.
Thank you, Ms. Kukunis.
Mr. Schneider, do you have information that you want to share? Ms.
Sure.
Downs, do you want Mr. Schneider to put that up on the screen for everyone to see?
Sure, as long as he could explain it if we don't understand it.
Okay, let's give it a shot here. Okay, can everybody see my chart there?
Yes.
Okay. So what I just tried to do, and sorry we're doing this quickly, this represents, this highlighted section here represents the clubs and music broken down by school. And obviously you've seen this chart before. This represents the sports,
Right.
broken down by season and then by level of competition. This is the running total of what these two things cost. Now, this highlighted area here, that's the plan that Mrs. Healy was referring to a few minutes ago that had previously been discussed by the board a couple of meetings back, where we cut back on some of the clubs. We try to preserve the music in its entirety. We cut back on some of the clubs at the middle school and high school and completely eliminate the elementary clubs. So what the board could do is the board could say, show us what it would look like if we just did music, but I'm using this as an example. If we just did music and we eliminated elementary clubs, if 1.26 is too hot, is too unpalatable, how would that affect? So then what we can just do here, I'm sorry, I'm building this on the fly. So then, if you were to say, eliminate the elementary clubs, hopefully this will work. Well, then that drops you down to 1.218. But you could say, you know what? And again, I'm using this example, eliminate the high school clubs. Well, that drops you down to 1.16. So you could use this chart if you wanted and have a discussion in order to make this number here, which I'll highlight, be a number that you feel comfortable using the unappropriated fund balance, which again, as superintendent is telling you, and I'll echo that, is a dangerous road to go down. But if that's the will of the board, you can use this chart, see what's comfortable. You just tell me what to take out, I'll take it out, and you can see if you like that number better. Is that helpful or unhelpful?
Now, let me just throw something out there just to throw something into the wind here. This is the cost of the sports from last year with full seasons, right?
This is the cost of what sports would run this year if they were to run in their full capacity.
All right. And then, Mr. Doyle, I believe all the sports are being cut back, right? Aren't they, or no?
Still up to, being put up to discussion. Right now, fall sports are happening in every place in the state except for Nassau County.
Mr. Wallace, when the governor's saying that volleyball and football can't have games, if they can practice, then the costs are not going to go down that much because we're still paying a stipend to the coaches.
Gotcha.
Sam, I know it's going to be a very small number in comparison, but just for visual, can you take out anything elementary? So I guess that would just be the clubs and the music. Okay.
Does the board have an idea of a target number that they're looking for?
Can we just look at, again, because I'm concerned that we haven't, until we have our audit, can we just look at a season? Especially, like I said, I'm not looking so much to go into reserves, but to look at a line item and somewhat share that with, I guess, other expenses that maybe Ms. Tona is looking to use it for also. And what does elementary music entail?
Those are the performances, the concerts that elementary music has in the winter and in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Because the teachers get stipends for the evening performances.
And then we can, Dr. Kokonis had said about them, maybe we can come, like we're allowed to, it seems, at any time, come back to meet and then figure out what we're going to do for the rest of the year, or some way with the community fundraising. I don't want to just favor one season at a time, but I just, we're just going by, it's the seat of our pants right now. We don't know what this year is going to entail. And if we don't use any of this in the fall, then, right, it goes, it's money that we can use and reassess in the winter. If it ends up being like a 3-season sports that starts in January.
They have proposed if the sports doesn't happen until January, there's a possibility of even a 5-season. I believe, right, Mr. Dora, wasn't there a proposal with breaking down?
It was a 3 seasons starting in January, but each season's only going to be 10 weeks.
Right.
So it would be a shorter condensed season.
I thought I read something else about splitting up some of the seasons, but that might have just been talk.
I think we were talking about breaking it down to seasons if there was fundraising on the outside, that they would just do a season at a time in case the season got shorted by COVID or something.
Also, the clubs, I know everything here is pretty general. If we were to break down like the high school clubs, like what clubs are they? Are there any that only happen in the fall, so that if we support fall sports, that we would be supporting fall clubs and fall music? And if we didn't support winter sports because of the finances, then we wouldn't be able to support the winter clubs, and the spring the same.
Yeah,
you know
generally clubs are a full year stipend. So
Yeah.
it's not in the contract broken down by season.
Right, okay. So there's nothing that we could do if we're supporting everything, then we're not really able to manipulate any of the top section of the high school clubs, middle school, all of that. That would have to be voted as a whole, whereas in the sports, we can do it by season, we could do it by level.
You could decide on the clubs to bring back a school, a level. You could say, we're looking at only high school clubs or only elementary clubs. That you can do because that's easy for us. Mr. Schneider, you have the club list, right?
Okay, so.
Yes, I do. Yes.
Do you want to see the club list, Mrs. Hockey?
For clubs like the full year, but they rotate the kids. I know the elementary in Pulaski, like my daughter rotates. They rotate the kids a lot of times. So most of the clubs on that level the full year.
Right, because it's the stipend for the teacher. So
I figured. Is there, just for visual, could you take away everything but high school clubs and high school music? And on the sports, just take away We'll just leave varsity, all seasons.
And Ms. Downs, while we're at a little break, I know I'm beating a dead horse with this, but I just looked up on the website. Practice cannot start until September 21st. That's not games, that's practicing. That's per the governor's ruling. So I make a motion that we table this into after our budget meeting to save some time tonight.
Okay. So,
You have a motion on the table.
I second the table.
well, I'm still here processing the chart that Sam just took out. So if we could just respect my question, I'd really appreciate
Well,
that.
like I had said prior, if we can have this in the update, we've had previous updates with everything broken down, and board members must do their homework for the meeting.
Okay, this is just confirmation and visual for the public, the community members that are watching tonight that maybe haven't read it as thoroughly as you and I may have as board members. There are some new community members that are on the meeting tonight that may not have been aware of some of these numbers here. So I'm just trying to put it out there for visual so that when the board does come to a final decision, everyone is clear on why we said or did what we did. So again, this is a very difficult decision, and I know myself, I'd rather see it 100 times and be repetitive than once and make a rash decision. So so this number right here is much more manageable in the sense than the 1.3 million. So is this right here something that we could agree upon tonight and then revisit adding what was just eliminated after the audit meeting? Is anyone in favor?
I think that's what Mr. Wallace was stating, was that would be a rash decision. We should wait until the audit is complete and then revisit. But in the meantime, we can be updated on these numbers. I know a lot of these numbers were repetitive in previous presentations, but we may be updated in the meantime and look it over after our audit. To decide anything right now, as you said, is very rash.
Thank you, Ms. Kokonis.
So is there any other board member that would consider looking at this tonight, making a decision using some of our funds for what we're looking at now, the numbers on the board right now, to make a decision tonight and then revisit adding the rest after our audit meeting? I know there are board members that are not in favor of that. You've been very clear. Are there any board members that are in favor of this?
I am.
In front of us right now.
Ms. Downs, I do believe I have a motion.
We have a motion on the table to put this to aside and come back to it. What was your motion again? Repeat it, please.
I made a motion that we revisit this after the budget meeting on the 16th, being that I just looked up on the website and practices cannot resume until September 21st. So that means nobody's allowed on the field to do anything until September 21st. We will have more knowledge of how much money we have. That was the recommendation of the auditor. And that's what my motion was.
I need a second.
I second. I'm not going to vote on funding varsity and then 2 weeks later, oops, we're sorry, we can't fund anything else.
Thank you, Ms.
That's very biased.
Okay, so the motion on the table with a second is to hold off until after the 16th and see what's going on the 21st. Correct, Mr. Wallace?
That is correct, Ms. Downs. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Wallace?
Yes.
Mr. Dorr?
No.
Ms. Kokonis?
Yes.
Mr. Howsky?
No.
Mr. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Healy?
my internet went out, so I didn't hear any of that. I'm sorry.
What's on the table is what we're voting on is to hold off till the 21st, to see what happens with the audit on this 16th.
Okay. So did you
myself
voting?
Excuse me?
Did you start the voting?
You, the second to last one.
Oh, I know, I missed, like I said, my internet froze and I did not get any of the rest of that, so.
I understand that. You're the second to last vote. Do you want to continue with what we're doing today, or do you want to wait till the 21st?
Well, Ms. Downs, Ms. Downs, can I just go over the motion? The motion was the budget meeting is on the 16th.
Virginia, he's talking to explain to you. Go ahead, Wallace.
Ms. Haley, I made a motion that we have our budget meeting on the 16th, so I made a motion to table this to after the budget meeting, being that the teams cannot practice anyway until the 21st. So we can have a special meeting on or after, right after the 16th.
Okay.
And the last vote is myself. So motion is passed. So this.
I'm sorry, Ms. Downs. Was Ms. Healy voting yes? Because she said okay. So is she voting yes to the motion, or?
Ms. Healy, could you clarify?
I would like to wait to hear for the audit. So I'm going to vote yes, because I would like to know how much more we can fund if we can. Because ideally I would like to see the clubs as well as sports for all the children.
Okay, so the motion is passed. So this is done for tonight, and we hold off until after the 16th when we discuss it when the audit committee meets. Okay, so moving on to new business. I need a motion.
Motion to accept.
Thank you. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Any comments? This is the approval of memorandum of agreement with the, it's an MOA with the Riverhead Administrators Association. Mr. Wallace?
Yes.
Mr. Jor?
Yes.
Dr. Kukunis?
Yes.
Mr. Houski?
Yes.
Mr. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Healy?
Yes.
And myself is yes. Memorandum passes. There's no reports for board committees at this point. But board remarks, anybody have?
Ms. Downs,
Yes.
added new business number, letter B from executive session.
Oh, you didn't?
It's approval of determination of step 2 grievance.
Okay, so we have I need a motion for the step 2 grievance.
Motion.
Thank you. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
Mr. Wallace?
Yes.
Mr. Dorr?
Yes.
Dr. Kukunis?
Yes.
Ms. Zahowski?
Yes.
Mr. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Healy?
Yes.
And myself is a yes. Step 2 grievance is approved. So we need.
Can we go back? The motion was to deny the grievance.
The denial was approved.
Yes, that's correct.
Wanted to be clear.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, that's my mistake. So did any board members have any remarks or comments they'd like to make?
I do.
Go right ahead.
I have a couple. The first regarding senior pictures that I guess started today. I understand that the photographer was not going to allow breaks for the girls and caps and gowns for the boys and the girls to be shared. That is okay. but I think it was completely unfair for the yearbook advisor to determine that no cap and gown pictures would be allowed. If students had a cap and gown or could borrow or purchase a cap and gown, they should have been able to have the cap and gown pictures taken this week. I do understand that Ms. Mackey has tirelessly worked to have a chance in the spring, maybe for these cap and gown pictures to be taken, but they should have been allowed during the same as any other graduating classes had.
It's my understanding that they're going to allow the cap and gown photos later in the year. At least that's the plan of the photography studio. I believe that's what I read last. Yeah,
that's what I've heard, but it should have been an option with their photos. It's again, something taken away from these kids that every other senior, including last year's senior class, had an opportunity to do.
Yes, that I just found the information. The plan is to do it in the spring with the cap and gown photos. So it's a circumstance with the company that we use, but they're going to allow the cap and gown photos to be done later in the year.
My understanding, it wasn't the photographer's decision, it was our decision. So that's where my problem lies.
That's not the information I had.
Ms. Tona, isn't it the photographers that are used, aren't they chosen by the PTOs and contracted out by the PTOs?
That I'm not sure for senior photos. I don't know.
Might be senior class. If it is funded or those contracts are signed by PTOs, our staff has nothing to say about it. It is a parent group, and it's up to them.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the senior photos.
Okay.
Ms. Downs?
Yes.
I don't know about the contract, but as a parent of a few seniors that have graduated, we were given a letter, a time, an appointment as to when our child was supposed to go to their particular senior photo. I know that they arranged it to happen more conveniently for this class, but it was not funded by the PTO. Like, you have to pay for that, the photos.
I know that. I'm talking about the contract. Who contracted it? Whoever signed that contract.
Okay.
Okay, I have other comments.
Yes, Mr. Dorr.
I understand that we're waiting on devices to come in for our students. What happens to the instruction while we're waiting for these devices to come in? If students are remote and they don't have a device, how are they going to hand in assignments or perform their work? Or how are they going to be graded until they get a device?
It's my understanding that the devices are going to be distributed this week before Thursday. And students, level? I'm sorry. Yeah, the one issue is iPads. We're picking more up on Wednesday because we had a donation through, well, it's not donation, through a consortium grant that we have Eastern Suffolk BOCES. So we should be right there. The additional devices that were ordered are going to allow us to be at a one-to-one capacity. So right now we do ask families that do not need the device and they have one at home to use for the short term. And in the very near future, as soon as these devices arrive, we should be at a capacity where we can have one-to-one devices.
I have a comment about that. What happened about the devices that were donated by the teachers union and by outside?
Those are being distributed.
Those were distributed
this week. They weren't all distributed in the spring because it took a lot of time to configure all of the devices because they were blank slates. So they needed to be configured by the technology department.
Were those given to the students that did get them? Were they given to them to have and to hold?
No.
Or was it ours? They were supposed to hand them in?
We allowed all of the families that borrowed devices in the spring to keep them over the summer because it was going to require, we didn't know what if we were coming back in person in June. So if we had collected all the devices in June and we started remote from September, full remote, we were going to have to go back through the whole process of redistributing devices again. So we felt it was best for the safety of everyone in the spring to allow the families to hold on to the devices. The seniors and students that left the district were asked to return them. The technology department had everything on inventory and everything was signed out to people so they knew who they got from and who they didn't get from.
So they know if a person comes that they already had gotten one, right?
Yes, they have that information.
Mr. Doyle, you have anything else?
Yeah, one last thing. And this is, I know it's too late, but I feel that the communication about our start date was really lacking, especially on the elementary level. We had parents who thought they were in the Thursday, Friday cohort and were making childcare arrangements only to find out that the Monday, Tuesday cohort was actually going to go on Thursday. And then the Thursday, Friday cohort was going to go on Monday. And then the Monday, Tuesday was going to start again on Tuesday. It was very confusing, where I think just a simple calendar probably would have been a lot clearer to all the parents.
My apologies if it was confusing. It was in the original plan that way. And it's been communicated by the principals in the mailing that was just received.
Yeah, some of the mailing still hasn't been received by the elementary parents. And it may have been on our website and even on the plan, but our website is so hard to navigate, and especially if you're a brand new kindergarten parent trying to get in and try to figure out what's going on. It really wasn't right for them. And that's about the communication. The one last thing is I want to thank everybody who sent in a letter, student, parent, grandparent, whoever it was, about saving sports and music in the clubs. We did hear you and we appreciate all your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Anyone else?
Can I ask when we will meet in person as a Board of Ed?
Yeah, when's that going to be lifted? Do we know?
Mr. Venator, what was it, September 5th? Is that the next expiration date of the open meeting law?
I believe it's either the 4th or the 5th.
Okay, so we still wait for if he changes it or not?
The governor tends to change it at the last possible moment. So you could anticipate that if it's through the 4th, then you'll find out on the 4th. If it's through the 5th, you'll find out on the 5th. But it has been typically on the day and towards the latter part of that day.
Correct. Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any more comments? Not hearing any more. Opportunity for RCFA. Lisa?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Downs. We have a short comment from the RCSA president this evening. Good evening. The RCSA welcomes all new teachers to the Riverhead family. We are hoping that all stakeholders in the district will have a safe and healthy school year. Thank you, Gregory Wallace, RCSA president.
Okey-dokey. It seems to be it. All right. No more questions or anything. Do we have anybody in the waiting room?
Yes, there are 5 people waiting.
Okay, Mr. Schneider, can you bring them in?
Sure. Here comes Chris and Jane Nedwich.
Okay, Jane. It seems to be it. All right. No more questions or anything. Do we have anybody in the waiting room? Hi, Jane. If you have your YouTube on, please turn it off so we can hear you.
Hi, is that better?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
Go right ahead.
My question is, my son is going into 7th grade in the middle school. So his first day will be at home, a virtual day. So I know that we're supposed to have our children sign in to, the Google Classrooms as soon as we get all that information. And I realize this is a very difficult and new, way to go to school. But what is the plan? Are they supposed to sign into each class? Are we going to get some information from the middle school? Is there a certain time that they have to sign in? That's, I'm just curious as how that is going to work. Or is it just to sign in and their first real school day will be when they attend school for their first cohort in-person day?
Ms. Toner?
Hi, Mrs. Netwich. The students will be starting as of Thursday, whether they're in person or remote. It's my understanding that the Google Classroom codes will be on the portal. But if you haven't received the letter yet from the middle school, you should tomorrow. I know all of the mailings have gone out at this point. So you should.
I did receive the letter, but there was no real instruction on the first day if you're virtual.
Is that what the middle school said in their letter?
It really just gave us our cohorts. And
I'll ask Dr. Hudson to clarify that and send a robocall out tomorrow to families.
Okay.
Because it's my understanding that all of the Google Classroom codes will be in the portal. So the students will sign into the portal, they'll be able to see their codes, and then they would go into Google Classroom and they could access whatever lessons and assignments that the teachers have put out as of the first day.
Okay, and they can just go on whenever. There's no real timing for that.
Time. Correct,
okay.
Correct. Anytime each day, each school day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Netwich, and thank you for your email.
Anytime, thank you.
Thank you. Next to Mrs. Schneider.
Here comes Kimberly Terry.
Kimberly. Is she connecting?
Yeah, it says connecting to audio.
Ellen McWilliams. Join the meeting.
Hello?
Ms. Downs, it still says connecting to audio. Would you like me to put her back in the waiting room and go to the next person?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, the next person is just listed as an initial S.
Okay, S. Are they connecting?
It says connecting to audio.
Hello? They still connecting?
Yes.
It's got to be a lag or something.
I can put them back in the waiting room and go on to the next person.
Okay.
Okay. Here comes Christina Mowdy.
Christina?
Okay, you should be connected now.
Christina, you there? Hello? It shows that she's connected?
Yes, it does.
She's not even showing on a board.
All right, I'll put her back in the waiting room and see. And the last person just has a phone number, so I will try to change the number as it comes up.
Okay, phone number.
Hello? Hello?
Hello. Can I have your name, please?
Ellen McWilliams.
Hi, Ellen McWilliams. Go on with your question.
Okay, so I agree with the first caller that the middle school didn't send out information on what they're supposed to do the first day of remote. And, you know, is there any possibility that they can have portable classrooms or, you know, so that the children are going to school 5 days a week? They've been out of school for 6 months.
Ms. Zona?
Yeah, unfortunately, portable classrooms are not an easy task. They cost a lot of money to purchase, and then you need to have approval by SED in order to use them as classrooms. There was no way that we were able to make that happen in time for the school year. And unfortunately, because we need to social distance, we have to keep hold to the number of students, a maximum capacity of students in the classroom in order to be properly socially distanced. We completely understand. I wish more than anything else to have every student back in person, because that's truly the best way to educate.
Right. And then I noticed one of the comments, it sounded like you guys were talking about having a full remote option where there wouldn't be any in-person learning. Is that what I was hearing correctly on the school board meeting?
That has been an option for families. At this point, we ask if anyone wishes to do that to contact the building, but please know that it may take at least a week to possibly place your child, depending on what the space looks like, because we've been moving around sections, moving from the hybrid model to virtual. And we need to, at this point, get the school year moving and see how many students we have in each of those options before we look to add additional classrooms for virtual.
And that, would it be possible that they start the school year and everything goes good and the kids go back to school 5 days?
I hope so. It's not our decision to make, but I'm very hopeful. That I want that more than anything else.
And whose decision is it to make?
Right now, it's the governor's been the one that's telling us how many students we can have. We have to have them socially distanced 6 feet apart. We have every one of our classrooms are being used. So it's not, we don't have the space and we don't have the staff. We would have to
possibly renting the Mercy building, Mercy High School. That's not an option.
No, that's not an option at this time. And any other space that we were to look at outside of the district would require us to file plans with SED and have make sure that we're following all to building codes and to New York State Education Department building codes.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank
you, Ms. Williams.
Okay, take care.
Have
Bye-bye.
a nice evening.
Ms. Downs?
Yes.
Can I just ask a question about the cohort? What if you're absent? Are you able to log in even if it's not your day?
The students can log in every single day. If it's a day that they're scheduled in person and they don't attend in person, they're going to be marked absent that day, but they could still access the lessons. But we need to have some mechanism if they chose to be hybrid and they're coming in those 2 days out of their cohort days, that if they're not there on those days, then they'll be marked absent, but they can still access the lesson.
They can access and still do the work and, okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Schneider?
There's nobody else waiting, Mrs. Downs.
Oh, they all went away?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
no more comments. I need a motion to go home.
Motion.
Can I have a second, please?
Second, whatever.
Thank you. Mr. Wallace?
Yes.
Mr. Dorr?
Yes.
Dr. Kukunis?
Yes.
Ms. Zahowski?
Yes.
Mr. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Healy?
Yes.
And myself is a yes. Okie dokie. I guess we'll see each other next time. Have a nice evening, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.